More than 100 articles across our country smearing this man's name, smearing his wife's name, smearing a member of this body's name. And we all saw it when we put this young man under oath and showed him the documents. Guess what? Didn't happen. Wasn't true. And that is indicative of their entire case. We should not be in a position to where we have to come in here and prove our innocence, but we did.
What was this trial all about? My goodness, it was all over the news. You couldn't escape it. Joining me now, my friend Sara Gonzales, host of the great News and Why It Matters on The Blaze. Sara, okay, pretend like I'm not actually from Texas and I don't know who Ken Paxton is and I don't know what was going on. Why was Ken Paxton being impeached? What happened?
So how this came about is that there were 7 whistleblowers, actually 8 whistleblowers, 4 whistleblowers who actually ended up filing a lawsuit against the Office of the Attorney General, claiming that they were fired for retribution because they went to the FBI with certain accusations. So they filed a lawsuit against Ken Paxton's office, and Ken Paxton's office asked the Texas House to settle the case purely because it would have cost much more money to go through all of the litigation, and his office was trying to save taxpayers some dollars. What ended up happening was the Texas House used this for retribution after Ken Paxton called out Speaker of the House Dade Phelan for being drunk on the Texas House floor while conducting business back in May. All of a sudden, after Ken Paxton called him out for being drunk and asked him to resign, we learned of this big investigation that was taking place into Ken Paxton because of the lawsuit that had been filed that he had subsequently asked Speaker of the House and the Texas House to take up and settle. So then all of a sudden we heard of all of these whistleblowers who all had these baseless allegations about Ken Paxton misusing and abusing his office, Ken Paxton accepting bribes in the form of granite countertops, all of these sexy and salacious allegations about our Texas Attorney General who had misused his office, who had, in some cases, they accused him of committing crimes. They accused him of conspiracy. They accused him of dereliction of duty. They accused him of abuse of public trust. I mean, these were very, very serious allegations that they were throwing on Ken Paxton. And when we saw the trial, I mean, I watched basically every minute of it, Jesse, unfortunately. And when we saw all of this shake out, we were told by the House the evidence is 10 times worse than what you know. And what we saw happen when we actually saw all the evidence in the trial was that it was a bunch of bureaucrats who had all of these suspicions about their boss. They didn't like the way their boss was conducting his business. And in such an Alexander Vindman-esque way, they decided that they knew better than their boss. And they held it against him. They had a chip on their shoulders. And all of a sudden, they thought he was committing all of these crimes, and they went to the FBI with all these baseless allegations, and come to find out once you review the evidence, there was nothing there.
Let's rewind just a minute. This Dade Phelan, we actually have this video of this dude just 3 sheets to the wind. Here's this Dade Phelan you referenced.
Mr. Campbell sent an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the opposite amendment? The chair has none. The amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Johnson of Harris. Mr. Johnson of Harris to speak in opposition to the bill.
You want Niave? Chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to speak.
The chair recognizes Ms. Niave Criado to speak in opposition to the bill.
Okay, so feeling pretty well. Sara, okay, it's one thing to be embarrassed for getting called out for acting like that publicly. It's another thing to bring, 16, 17 counts. That seems like a drastic overreaction. There has to be more to the reasoning behind this, Sara.
I mean, look, you would think in a reasonable state, in a deep conservative, what some people might think is this very strong conservative state of Texas, that we wouldn't operate this way. But unfortunately, what we have seen is no Republican in the Texas legislature called for Ken Paxton's impeachment until 48 hours after Ken Paxton called for Dade Phelan to resign. If that's not what it was all about, then tell me, why don't we have any Republican on record publicly calling for Ken Paxton to resign prior to this? Because remember, all of these allegations, all of these whistleblower complaints, all of these were things that occurred in 2019 and 2020. So this was a case that dated all the way back before the past election, where voters overwhelmingly elected Ken Paxton again to run our state. So what Dade Phelan, I guess, wanted to do was override the will of 4.2 million Texas voters who said, we want him running our state. We don't want George P. Bush, by the way. And it really does seem to be as simple as that. This was a vendetta. This was political retribution. And thank God it didn't work.
George P. Bush. Is the Bush family involved in this thing?
Well, curiously enough, Jesse, the whistleblowers, the 4 whistleblowers who went on to file a lawsuit, at least 3 of those whistleblowers are using an attorney by the name of Johnny Sutton, who has very strong ties to the Bush family, including being a U.S. district attorney for George W. Bush. And he was actually involved in some controversial issues where he was charging Border Patrol agents for defending our border. And so Johnny Sutton was the attorney who's been representing these whistleblowers for 3 years, getting paid $0 from any of these whistleblowers with absolutely no contract of how he is about to get paid. Meanwhile, at the same time that this is occurring and the whistleblowers are going to the FBI, George P. Bush is reinstating his law license that he let lapse for 10 years. And then, of course, we know the rest of the story. Months later, he went on to run for Attorney General.
Of course. Oh, of course. What a dirty bit of business. By the way, this was Ken Paxton after he got off scot-free.
And so I just want to finish my comments, and then I'll let Eric say what he's going to say, and just say to the President of the United States, you know, let's go, Brandon. We'll see you in court.
What's he doing with Joe Biden?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Since Ken Paxton has been suspended, we've had the border buoy barrier issue going on in federal court, where, of course, the DOJ is trying to sue Texas to remove these buoys that we have to try to prevent illegal immigrants from entering into the country. The Biden regime says that that's not humane, that we can't do that. We can't prevent these people from trying to enter through our own sovereign border. Not to mention, there are several different lawsuits going on with all of the, the ACLU is suing Texas over the so-called drag ban. They're suing over pornographic books in schools. So there are a lot of issues that have kind of gone to the wayside since Ken Paxton has been gone. And I think he's putting Biden on notice that he's back, baby.
Yeah, gosh. Well, Sarah, do we put any credence behind the theory that it was the Pfizer stuff, the Ken Paxton going after these pharmaceutical companies stuff, that in part prompted all this, or you really do think it was just this petty thing with our drunk speaker?
I do. I really do think that there's a growing disconnect between the establishment Republicans in the Texas legislature and the grassroots movement. And I think that it's been growing and growing for a long time. And these establishment members of the Texas House, the Senate, pretty strong. The House, as you saw from the impeachment vote, I believe there were 60 Republicans who voted with the Democrats and the Speaker of the House to jam these impeachment proceedings onto the Senate's lap. So much so that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick called them out. He said he wants a full audit of how much the Texas House has spent on all of this impeachment proceedings. And he wants to amend the Texas Constitution to make the language stronger so that no one has to go through this impeachment based on baseless allegations ever again. To me, that signifies that this was all political retribution. I really don't buy into the big pharma, aspect of it. Maybe if there was some evidence there, but from what I can see, the timing of it all suggests that this really was these two different factions in Texas in the Republican Party. Do we want establishment members? Do we want the GOP swamp here in Texas, or do we want the grassroots conservatives?
Sarah, why does our Republican Party suck so bad in our red states like Texas? We're certainly not alone, but our reddest states have the most useless GOPs, and I can't quite wrap my mind around why.
Well, I think it comes down to the base. I think it comes down to the voters. I think that they take for granted. They say, I live in Texas. Texas is a deep red state and nothing could ever go wrong. Nothing will ever make Texas turn purple or blue. Meanwhile, They distance themselves completely from the voting process. They don't participate in primaries. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, you and I have a friend, Chad Prather. He ran for governor of Texas in the last election. And I can't tell you how many people said things like, don't do that, you'll split the vote and a Democrat will get elected. Or they'll say, well, if only Governor Abbott had someone running against him who was more conservative. Meanwhile, there were multiple people running against him who were more conservative, but these people don't participate in the process. They take their state for granted. They take the political process for granted. And that's how you end up with a bunch of establishment members in office due to just voter inaction, and they don't participate in the process.
Yeah, they don't. We have a people problem. Sara, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Jesse.
I have great news. If you enjoyed that, I have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to. Whatever I do, it'll be right there on YouTube. So go subscribe today.